Sometimes the biggest mistake criminals make is underestimating their victims. On a scorching Tuesday afternoon in Desert Springs, Arizona, two police officers handcuffed a black woman outside Miller's Corner grocery store, convinced they'd caught another shoplifter. The theft alarm had sounded. Drugs were found in her purse. Case closed. Just another day of easy arrests in their corrupt little kingdom. But as the handcuffs clicked shut, Beverly Shaw didn't panic. She didn't protest. She simply noted the officers' badge numbers, memorized their faces, and activated the recording device hidden in her phone. Because Beverly Shaw wasn't just another victim of small-town racism. She was an FBI agent with 20 years of federal law enforcement experience, and she'd just walked into the biggest corruption case of her career. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you are watching from. What happened next would destroy a 30-year criminal empire and prove that justice has no color, only truth. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Beverly Shaw moved through the narrow aisles of Miller's Corner, her cart containing nothing more suspicious than bottled water, protein bars, and a local newspaper. She'd been in Desert Springs for 3 days, maintaining her cover as a freelance consultant while gathering intelligence on what the FBI suspected was a major drug trafficking operation. Behind the counter, store owner Pete Miller watched her every move through the convex security mirror, his weathered fingers drumming nervously against the register. His eyes tracked her with the kind of intensity reserved for someone he'd already decided was guilty. Beverly noticed the surveillance but kept her movements casual, professional. 20 years with the Bureau had taught her to read a room, and this room screamed of something deeper than simple prejudice. The way Miller's hand hovered near his phone, the suspicious glances toward the back office, the fact that this particular store sat directly on the route she'd identified as a key smuggling corridor. She approached the counter with her items, offering a polite smile. "Just these, please." Miller's hands shook slightly as he rang up her purchases. $37.43. Beverly handed him exact change, thanked him, and headed for the exit. The theft alarm shrieked the moment she crossed the threshold. Beverly stopped, genuinely confused. She knew with absolute certainty she hadn't taken anything. But as she turned back toward the store, she saw Miller already reaching for his phone, and she realized this wasn't an accident. This was a setup. The police cruiser arrived with suspicious speed, as if it had been waiting around the corner. Officer Davis stepped out first, a thick-set man whose uniform strained against his gut, followed by his partner, Deputy Miller, a younger officer whose nervous energy suggested he was new to whatever game they were playing. Beverly raised her hands slightly, keeping them visible. "Officers, I think there's been a misunderstanding. The alarm went off, but I didn't take anything." "Ma'am, we need you to step away from your vehicle," Davis commanded, his hand resting on his belt near his weapon. His tone carried the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Of course." Beverly complied immediately, her FBI training kicking in. De-escalate, gather information, document everything. "I'm happy to cooperate. Would you like to search my bags? You'll see I only have what I paid for." Deputy Miller shifted uncomfortably, glancing between his partner and Beverly. "Maybe we should just—" "We'll handle this, Miller," Davis cut him off sharply. He stepped closer to Beverly, invading her personal space. "Ma'am, we're going to need to search your bags and your vehicle, and we're going to need to see some identification." Beverly reached slowly for her purse, every movement deliberate and non-threatening. But as she pulled out her wallet, she caught Davis exchanging a look with store owner Pete Miller, who was watching from his doorway. A look that said they'd done this before. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to turn around and place your hands on the vehicle." The metal of the patrol car hood burned against Beverly's palms as Officer Davis pressed her forward, the desert heat radiating through the steel. She kept her breathing steady, her mind cataloging every detail. The way Davis positioned himself to block the security camera's view, how Deputy Miller kept glancing nervously at the store, the fact that neither officer had actually examined her receipt or the items she'd purchased. "You carrying anything illegal? Weapons? Drugs? Anything that's going to stick me?" Davis asked, his hands already moving toward her purse. No, sir. Nothing like that. Davis dumped the contents of her purse onto the hood with unnecessary force. Wallet, keys, phone, lip balm, breath mints. The mundane contents of a woman's everyday life. But as he rifled through her wallet, Beverly noticed something that made her blood run cold. A small plastic baggie fell from between her credit cards. Well, 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 Davis said loudly, holding up the baggie for his partner to see. Look what we have here, Miller. Looks like crystal meth to me. Beverly's mind raced. She knew that baggie hadn't been in her wallet, which meant they'd planted it during the search, probably palmed it from Davis's pocket when he'd crowded against her. That's not mine, she said calmly. I've never seen that before in my life. That's what they all say, Davis replied with practiced indifference. Ma'am, you're under arrest for possession of a controlled substance and theft. You have the right to remain silent. As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, Beverly made mental notes of everything. The badge numbers, the patrol car's unit designation, the way Deputy Miller couldn't meet her eyes, the fact that this entire encounter had taken less than 15 minutes from start to finish. They'd done this before, probably many times, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. The Desert Springs police station looked exactly like what it was, a small-town operation that had grown too comfortable with its own power. Faded motivational posters about community service hung next to newer ones about drug interdiction, creating an ironic juxtaposition that wasn't lost on Beverly. During the booking process, she observed everything with the trained eye of a federal agent. The way officers moved through the building with the casual confidence of people who knew they wouldn't be questioned. The expensive equipment that seemed out of place in a department serving a town of 8,000 people. The multiple phones on the desk sergeant's table, including what looked like encrypted satellite communication devices. One phone call, Officer Davis said, pushing a grimy handset toward her. Make it count. Beverly dialed her cover contact, a Phoenix attorney named Janet Coleman, who served as her emergency backup. But after 3 rings, the call went to voicemail. Problem with your lawyer? The voice came from behind her, deep and gravelly with the confidence of 3 decades in law enforcement. Beverly turned to see Sheriff Duncan Stone approaching, a man who commanded attention without trying, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of presence that filled a room. His uniform was perfectly pressed, his boots gleamed, and his badge caught the fluorescent light like it was made of real gold. Sheriff Stone, Davis said, straightening unconsciously. We brought in a suspect for possession and theft. Stone's eyes never left Beverly's face as he spoke. I can see that, Officer Davis. Why don't you let me handle our guest from here? The way he said guest made Beverly's skin crawl. There was knowledge in his voice, a confidence that suggested he knew more about her presence in Desert Springs than she was comfortable with. Ma'am, Stone continued, gesturing toward his office, why don't we have a private conversation? I think we have quite a lot to discuss. Sheriff Stone's office was a shrine to 3 decades of law enforcement. Commendations covered one wall. Photographs of him with governors and senators covered another. Behind his desk, an American flag stood next to the Arizona state flag, both perfectly positioned to frame anyone sitting in his chair. Beverly remained standing as Stone settled behind his desk, studying her with the patient attention of a predator sizing up prey. You know, Stone began, leaning back in his leather chair, we don't get many visitors in Desert Springs, especially not visitors who pay for their groceries with federal credit cards. Beverly's heart rate spiked, but she kept her expression neutral. Her cover identity included legitimate credit cards, but someone would have had to run a very deep background check to trace them back to federal sources. I'm not sure what you mean, Sheriff. Stone smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. Agent Beverly Shaw, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Criminal Investigative Division, badge number 2847. Currently assigned to the Phoenix Field Office under Special Agent in Charge Rodriguez. The bottom dropped out of Beverly's world. Her cover wasn't just blown. It had been systematically dismantled. She made a calculated decision. When your cover is blown, sometimes the best defense is controlled offense. If you know who I am, Sheriff, then you know you're making a serious mistake. I'm a federal agent conducting an authorized investigation. This arrest is going to create problems for everyone involved. Stone's laugh was genuinely amused. Agent Shaw, you seem to be under the impression that your badge carries weight in my jurisdiction. Beverly straightened, letting her professional authority show for the first time. Federal law supersedes local authority, Sheriff. You know that. Does it? Stone stood and walked to his window, gazing out at the desert landscape. See, that's where you federal folks always get confused. You think your jurisdiction extends everywhere, but what you don't understand is that out here, jurisdiction is about relationships, about trust, about knowing who you can count on when things get complicated. As Stone continued his monologue, Beverly carefully slipped her hand into her pocket, activating the emergency recording function on her phone. It was a bureau-issued device with enhanced memory and satellite backup, designed to keep recording even if the phone was destroyed. We've known about your investigation for 3 days, Agent Shaw. We know about your motel room at the Desert Inn. We know about your rental car. We know about your meetings with your CI in Phoenix. What you don't seem to understand is that your entire operation has been compromised from the beginning. Stone turned back to face her, his expression now deadly serious. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to be processed on the possession charge. You're going to plead guilty to avoid a trial. You're going to serve your time quietly, and when you get out, you're going to forget you ever heard of Desert Springs, Arizona. Beverly felt the walls closing in, but she forced herself to remain calm. And if I refuse? Stone's smile returned, cold and predatory. Agent Shaw, you're not in Kansas anymore. Out here, federal agents can disappear just as easily as anyone else. Stone returned to his desk and opened a manila folder, spreading photographs across the surface like a dealer laying out cards. Beverly's blood ran cold as she recognized aerial surveillance photos of remote desert locations, vehicles she'd been tracking, and people she'd identified as suspects. Recognize these? Stone asked conversationally. That's the Patterson Ranch, where your CI told you we store inventory. Those vehicles belong to the Morales family, who you've been investigating for cross-border trafficking. And that gentleman there is Carlos Vega, who you suspect is our connection to the Sinaloa cartel. Each photograph felt like a punch to Beverly's stomach. Not because they revealed classified information that could be explained by corruption within her own chain of command. What terrified her was the casual way Stone displayed them, as if her entire investigation was nothing more than an amusing game. How long have you known? Beverly asked quietly. Agent Shaw, we've been running this operation for 30 years. We've survived federal task forces, DEA raids, state police investigations, and congressional inquiries. Did you really think one lone FBI agent was going to bring us down? Beverly straightened her shoulders. I took an oath, Sheriff. I'm not walking away from that oath because you've managed to corrupt a few federal contacts. Stone's expression shifted, the mask of civility slipping for just a moment. Agent Shaw, you don't understand the scope of what you're dealing with. This isn't about corrupting a few contacts. This is about understanding that some operations are too big to fail. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. You can't fathom the network we've built. Judges, prosecutors, federal agents, state legislators. Even your own Special Agent Rodriguez has been very cooperative when we've needed favors. Beverly felt the recording device in her pocket, still running, capturing every word. So I'll ask you one more time, Agent Shaw. Are you going to be reasonable, or do we need to explore other options? The holding cell smelled of disinfectant and despair. Beverly sat on the narrow bench, processing everything she'd learned. Her investigation was compromised, her backup contacts were potentially corrupted, and she was trapped in a small town where the sheriff apparently controlled more than just local law enforcement. The heavy door clanged open, and a guard escorted in another woman. Mid-50s, weathered by desert sun and hard work, with the kind of quiet dignity that comes from facing life's challenges without complaint. Martha Williams, the woman introduced herself quietly once the guard left. Local resident for 28 years, and you're the FBI agent who's been stirring up the hornet's nest. Beverly studied Martha carefully. Word travels fast in a small town. Honey, word travels exactly as fast as Sheriff Stone wants it to travel. Martha settled on the opposite bench, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. But sometimes word travels through other channels, too. For the next few minutes, they sat in careful silence, both women understanding that their conversation was likely being monitored. Finally, Martha began speaking about seemingly innocuous topics. The weather, her job at the local diner, her concerns about young people leaving town. But embedded in her casual conversation were details that made Beverly's pulse quicken. References to delivery trucks that arrived at odd hours. Mentions of storage facilities that employed no local workers. Observations about business meetings that happened in the desert at night. The thing about small towns, Martha concluded, her eyes meeting Beverly's directly, is that people notice things, and some of us have been noticing for a very long time. Beverly understood. Martha Williams wasn't just another local resident. She was a potential witness, someone who'd been documenting the corruption for years. If someone hypothetically had evidence, Beverly asked carefully, would they be willing to share it with the right people? Martha's smile was grim but determined. If those right people could guarantee protection and justice, that someone might be very interested in sharing what they know. 2 hours later, Beverly was granted her second phone call. The guard led her to the same grimy phone she'd used earlier, but this time Sheriff Stone stood nearby, making no attempt to hide the fact that he was listening. Beverly dialed the FBI Phoenix field office, her fingers steady despite the circumstances. Special Agent Rodriguez answered on the second ring. Rodriguez here. Agent Rodriguez, this is Beverly Shaw. I need to report a situation. Shaw. Rodriguez's voice was carefully neutral. Where are you calling from? Desert Springs Police Department. I've been arrested on false charges and my investigation has been compromised. Beverly chose her words carefully, knowing Stone was analyzing every syllable. I see. What's your current status? I'm being held on possession charges. Sir, I need immediate backup and legal representation. The situation here is more complex than we initially assessed. There was a pause on Rodriguez's end. Agent Shaw, are you certain about your assessment of the situation? Beverly took a deep breath. It was time to activate the emergency protocol she hoped she'd never need. Sir, the weather conditions have deteriorated significantly. I'm requesting immediate implementation of Desert Storm protocols. Another pause. Desert Storm was the code phrase for a federal agent in mortal danger, requiring immediate extraction and backup. Rodriguez would understand that Beverly wasn't just requesting help. She was signaling that her life was in immediate danger. Understood, Agent Shaw. Desert Storm protocols will be implemented within 48 hours. Maintain your position and await further contact. Thank you, sir. Beverly hung up the phone, acutely aware of Stone's presence behind her. She turned to face him, keeping her expression as neutral as possible. Feel better? Stone asked with mock concern. I've notified my superiors of the situation. They'll be sending representation. Stone nodded thoughtfully. Agent Shaw, you have such touching faith in bureaucracy, but you're about to learn that bureaucracy moves very slowly when the right people want it to move slowly. As the guard escorted her back to the holding cell, Beverly clung to one hope, that Rodriguez had understood her message and that help was truly coming. Because if the Desert Storm protocol failed, she was completely on her own in a town where federal law apparently meant nothing. An hour after her phone call, Beverly was brought back to Stone's office. This time he was relaxed, almost celebratory, a bottle of expensive whiskey open on his desk. Agent Shaw, I thought you might want to understand exactly what you've stumbled into before your colleagues arrive to collect you. Beverly remained silent, her hand positioned near her pocket where the recording device continued to operate. Stone poured himself a drink and gestured to a map of Arizona pinned to his wall. Red pins marked locations throughout the southern part of the state. 30 years, Agent Shaw. 30 years of building something magnificent. We started small, just looking the other way when certain vehicles crossed certain checkpoints. But vision, real vision, requires thinking bigger. He moved to the map, pointing to various locations. Patterson Ranch for storage and distribution, 3 airstrips for direct delivery from Mexico, processing facilities disguised as agricultural operations, a network of law enforcement, judicial, and political contacts stretching from here to Phoenix to Washington. Beverly watched in amazement as Stone detailed his criminal empire with the pride of a successful businessman describing his company's growth. Do you know what our annual gross is, Agent Shaw? $57 million. We move more product through this corridor than the next 5 operations combined. And it's all possible because we understand that law enforcement isn't about enforcing laws, it's about controlling territory. Stone returned to his desk, savoring his whiskey. Your little investigation was doomed from the start because you thought you were fighting corruption. But this isn't corruption, Agent Shaw. This is evolution. This is law enforcement as it was always meant to be, profitable. The recording device captured every word, every detail, every admission of guilt. The next morning brought the phone call that shattered Beverly's remaining hope. Agent Shaw. Rodriguez's voice was cold, official, completely different from their conversation the day before. I'm calling to inform you that you've been suspended from active duty pending an internal investigation. Beverly gripped the phone harder. Sir, I don't understand. I activated Desert Storm protocols. I need immediate backup. Agent Shaw, there are no Desert Storm protocols in effect. Our review of your activities shows that you exceeded your authority, violated operational procedures, and failed to maintain proper communication with headquarters. The words hit Beverly like physical blows. Sir, that's not accurate. I was following approved investigative procedures under an authorized operation. Agent Shaw, the operation you were conducting was never officially authorized. You were told to conduct preliminary surveillance only. Instead, you pursued an active investigation without proper clearance or backup. Beverly's mind raced. She knew Rodriguez was lying, but she also understood what was happening. The corruption didn't just extend to local law enforcement. It reached into the FBI itself. Furthermore, Rodriguez continued, your arrest on drug possession charges raises serious questions about your judgment and reliability. The Bureau cannot provide assistance to agents who may have violated federal law themselves. Sir, those charges are fabricated. The drugs were planted by local police. That's your allegation, Agent Shaw. But given the circumstances, the Bureau has decided to distance itself from your situation until the matter can be thoroughly investigated. The line went dead. Beverly stared at the phone in her hand, understanding with crystalline clarity that she was completely alone. The FBI had abandoned her. The local authorities were corrupt, and everyone who might have helped her was either compromised or too far away to matter. For the first time in her career, Special Agent Beverly Shaw was truly on her own. The man who entered the consultation room introduced himself as David Harrison, attorney at law. He wore an expensive suit that seemed out of place in the Desert Springs police station, and his briefcase bore the logo of a prestigious Phoenix law firm. Ms. Shaw, I've been retained to represent you in this matter. Beverly studied him carefully. I didn't retain any attorney. Who's paying your fees? Harrison settled into the chair across from her, opening his briefcase with practiced efficiency. The Fraternal Order of Police Legal Defense Fund has stepped in to provide representation. It's not uncommon when law enforcement officers face legal difficulties. I'm not a local law enforcement officer. I'm FBI. Yes, well, law enforcement is law enforcement, isn't it? Harrison's smile was as artificial as his concern. Now I've reviewed your case, and I believe we can resolve this matter quite simply. He placed a document on the table between them. Beverly scanned it quickly, her blood pressure rising with each line. This is a guilty plea agreement. Yes. You plead guilty to simple possession, receive a suspended sentence with community service, and the matter is resolved. Clean and simple. Beverly pushed the document back across the table. I'm not pleading guilty to charges based on planted evidence. I want this case to go to trial. Harrison's expression shifted, the mask of professionalism slipping slightly. Ms. Shaw, I don't think you understand the complexities of your situation. A trial would be inadvisable. Because the evidence would show I'm innocent? Because trials can be unpredictable. Evidence can be misinterpreted. Witnesses can be unreliable. Judges can be... Harrison paused, choosing his words carefully. Influenced by factors beyond the courtroom. Beverly understood. The entire legal system in Desert Springs was compromised. Furthermore, Harrison continued, your own agency has declined to provide support. The FBI has effectively disavowed your actions. Fighting this case alone without federal backing would be professional suicide. Beverly looked at the guilty plea agreement again, understanding that it wasn't just a legal document. It was a trap designed to silence her permanently. I need time to consider this. Harrison's smile returned, cold and predatory. Of course. But don't take too long, Ms. Shaw. Justice delayed is justice denied, after all. That evening, as Beverly lay on the narrow cot in her cell, a folded piece of paper slipped through the food slot. She grabbed it quickly, unfolding it under the dim light. I know you're innocent. I have proof. Tomorrow during visiting hours. Trust no one else. J.T. Beverly's heart pounded as she read the message again. Someone knew the truth. Someone had evidence. But who was J.T., and how could she trust them when everyone else had betrayed her? The next day brought her answer. During visiting hours, a man in his 40s approached her table. Lean, intense, with the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd spent years asking difficult questions. Jake Turner, Phoenix News investigative reporter, he said quietly, sliding into the chair across from her. I've been tracking Sheriff Stone's operation for 8 months. Beverly studied him carefully. How do I know you're not another one of Stone's people? Turner placed a manila envelope on the table. Because if I were working for Stone, you'd already be dead. The blunt statement sent a chill through Beverly, but Turner's eyes were steady, serious. I've been investigating corruption in rural Arizona law enforcement. Stone's name kept coming up in connection with drug trafficking, money laundering, and witness intimidation. When you arrived in town 3 days ago, I started following the story. Turner opened the envelope slightly, revealing photographs and documents. I have pictures of the drug storage facilities, financial records showing unexplained wealth among local officials, testimony from 3 former deputies who quit rather than participate in Stone's operation. Why are you here? Why help me? Because I've been waiting for someone with your credentials to arrive. Someone who can't be dismissed as a local troublemaker or a disgruntled ex-employee. Someone whose federal status gives their testimony weight. Turner leaned forward, lowering his voice. But more importantly, because I have connections Stone doesn't know about. Judge Wilson, retired federal judge who moved here for his health. He still has emergency judicial powers, and he's been waiting for the right case to clean up this town. Beverly felt the first spark of genuine hope she'd experienced since her arrest. What do you need from me? The meeting took place in Judge Wilson's modest adobe home on the outskirts of Desert Springs. The retired federal judge was in his 70s, but his mind was sharp and his commitment to justice unwavering. Agent Shaw, Wilson said, studying the evidence spread across his dining room table. What you've gathered, combined with Mr. Turner's independent investigation, presents a compelling case for federal intervention. Beverly watched as Wilson examined her recorded confession from Stone, Turner's surveillance photographs, and Martha Williams' documented observations of criminal activity. The challenge, Wilson continued, is that Stone controls the local judicial system, and your own agency has been compromised. We need a mechanism to bypass both local and federal bureaucracy. Turner leaned forward. Judge, you still have emergency powers to convene special proceedings, correct? I do. In cases involving ongoing threats to public safety, I can order immediate hearings and authorize emergency broadcasts to ensure public awareness. Beverly felt the pieces clicking together. You're talking about a public hearing, live television coverage. Exactly, Wilson nodded. Stone's power depends on secrecy and isolation. But if we expose his operation in front of a live audience, with documented evidence and recorded confessions, even his political connections won't be able to protect him. Turner pulled out his phone. Phoenix News has broadcast capability. We can stream live coverage directly to our website and social media platforms. Once the story breaks nationally, it becomes impossible to suppress. Wilson gathered the evidence into organized stacks. Agent Shaw, I can schedule an emergency judicial review for tomorrow afternoon. You'll present your evidence. Turner will provide corroborating testimony, and Martha Williams can describe what she's witnessed over the years. Beverly felt a surge of hope mixed with fear. Stone won't let this happen quietly. He'll try to stop us. Which is why we're moving fast, Turner replied. By the time Stone realizes what's happening, we'll already be broadcasting live to thousands of viewers. Wilson's expression was grim but determined. Agent Shaw, 30 years of corruption is about to end. But you need to understand. Once we start this process, there's no going back. Stone will do everything in his power to stop us. Beverly woke to the sound of keys rattling in her cell door. Officer Davis stood in the corridor, his expression grim. Shaw, you're being transferred to county lockup in Phoenix. Transport leaves in 1 hour. Beverly's blood ran cold. The hearing was scheduled for that afternoon. If she was transferred to Phoenix, she'd miss her chance to expose Stone's operation. What's the reason for the transfer? Overcrowding, Davis replied without conviction. County has better facilities for federal prisoners. Beverly knew it was a lie. Desert Springs had held her for 3 days without any mention of overcrowding. This transfer was Stone's way of removing her from the equation permanently. As Davis escorted her to the processing area, Beverly caught sight of Stone in his office, speaking on the phone. His body language was agitated, aggressive, the posture of a man whose carefully constructed empire was under threat. During processing, Beverly was allowed one final phone call. She dialed Turner's number, praying he would answer. Turner here. It's Beverly. They're transferring me to Phoenix in an hour. The hearing, we know. Wilson's already filed emergency papers to block the transfer, but Stone's people are fighting it. We might have a narrow window. Beverly lowered her voice as Davis approached. If something happens to me during this transfer, nothing's going to happen. We've notified federal authorities, state police, and media contacts. Too many people are watching now. But as Beverly was led to the transport vehicle, she saw the driver, Deputy Miller, Stone's most loyal enforcer. And sitting in the passenger seat was a man she didn't recognize, broad-shouldered, wearing civilian clothes, with the kind of dead eyes she'd learned to associate with professional killers. The vehicle wasn't heading toward Phoenix. Beverly could tell from the sun's position that they were driving south toward the desert where bodies could disappear forever. As the police station faded in the rearview mirror, Beverly realized that Stone had decided the risk of exposure was too great. He wasn't just trying to silence her legally anymore. He was planning to silence her permanently. While Beverly was being driven into the desert, Sheriff Stone was implementing the second phase of his damage control strategy. He personally led a convoy of patrol cars to Martha Williams' small house on Cactus Street. Martha was waiting for them. She'd lived in Desert Springs long enough to recognize the sound of approaching trouble, and she'd spent the morning implementing her own backup plan. Stone approached her front door with Officer Davis and 2 other deputies. His knock was polite, almost friendly. Martha, we need to have a conversation. Sheriff Stone, Martha replied through the screen door. Unless you have a warrant, I don't believe we have anything to discuss. Martha, I think you've been talking to people you shouldn't be talking to, spreading stories that could hurt innocent folks. Martha opened the screen door and stepped onto her porch, facing Stone directly. I've been telling the truth, Sheriff, about what I've seen, about what you've been doing in this town for 30 years. Stone's expression hardened. Martha, you're an elderly woman living alone. This is a dangerous world. Accidents happen, houses catch fire, people get hurt. Is that a threat, Sheriff? It's a concerned neighbor looking out for your welfare. Martha smiled grimly. Sheriff, I may be elderly, but I'm not stupid, and I'm not defenseless. She held up her phone, showing that she'd been recording the entire conversation. This is being live-streamed to my granddaughter in Phoenix. She's a paralegal, Sheriff. She knows what witness intimidation looks like. Stone's mask slipped completely. Martha, you're making a serious mistake. The only mistake I made was staying quiet for 30 years while you turned my town into your personal kingdom. Stone gestured to his deputies, and they began surrounding the house. But as they moved into position, smoke began rising from Martha's backyard. What the hell? Stone began. Insurance fire, Martha said calmly. Amazing how quickly old newspaper burns, along with 30 years of photographs, documents, and evidence. Unless, of course, you'd like to retrieve it all before it's destroyed. Stone realized he'd been outmaneuvered. Martha had created a situation where he either had to let the evidence burn or reveal how desperately he wanted to destroy it. But the fire also meant Martha's house was no longer safe, and neither was Martha. The patrol car turned off the main highway onto a dirt road that led deeper into the Sonoran Desert. Beverly had been calculating distance and direction, and she knew they were nowhere near Phoenix. Through the bulletproof barrier separating her from the front seat, she could hear Deputy Miller talking on his radio. Unit 7 to base. Package is secure. Delivery in 15 minutes. Copy, Unit 7. Boss is waiting. Beverly tested her handcuffs, finding them properly secured. Her FBI training had included escape and evasion techniques, but the reality of being shackled in the back of a moving vehicle made those theoretical lessons feel inadequate. The car slowed and turned into what appeared to be an abandoned ranch compound. But as they approached the main building, Beverly could see signs of recent activity. Tire tracks, security cameras, and most tellingly, the kind of industrial ventilation system that suggested serious chemical processing. This wasn't just a storage facility. This was the heart of Stone's operation. Deputy Miller parked near the main building and killed the engine. The civilian who'd been riding shotgun, Beverly now noticed the outline of a shoulder holster under his jacket, got out and opened her door. End of the line, Agent Shaw. As they escorted her toward the building, Beverly noticed details that confirmed her worst fears. This was a professional operation. Multiple escape routes, sophisticated security equipment, and most ominously, what looked like a crematorium smokestack behind the main structure. Sheriff Stone was waiting inside. But this wasn't the polished professional she'd encountered at the police station. This was Stone in his natural environment, surrounded by millions of dollars worth of cocaine, methamphetamine, and heroin. Agent Shaw, welcome to the Real Desert Springs Police Department. The warehouse stretched for hundreds of yards, filled with industrial equipment for drug processing and packaging. Beverly counted at least 20 workers, all armed, all watching her with the dispassionate interest of people accustomed to violence. Impressive, isn't it? Stone gestured to the operation around them. 30 years of careful planning and strategic investment. From this facility, we supply product to dealers from Phoenix to Los Angeles to Denver. Beverly understood that she was seeing Stone's true confession, not the partial admissions he'd made in his office, but the full scope of his criminal empire. And she understood that witnesses to this level of revelation didn't leave alive. Stone led Beverly through his criminal empire with the pride of a CEO showing off a successful corporation. The warehouse was divided into distinct sections: processing, packaging, storage, and distribution. Each area operated with military precision. "This is where raw product arrives from our partners in Mexico," Stone explained, gesturing to a loading dock where workers unloaded unmarked trucks. "We process it here, package it there, and distribute it through a network that reaches 14 states. Beverly forced herself to remain calm, even as she witnessed the scope of Stone's operation. But hidden in her pocket, her phone, which Stone's people had failed to confiscate thoroughly, was recording everything through an encrypted FBI application designed to function even when the phone appeared to be off. "The beauty of our operation," Stone continued, "is legitimacy. We use real businesses as fronts. The Patterson Ranch is a working cattle operation. Our trucking company has legitimate contracts with major retailers. Our airstrips serve private aircraft belonging to businessmen who've never been arrested." Stone paused at a computer terminal displaying financial information. "Our gross revenue last year was $57 million. Our net profit, after paying salaries, bribes, and operating expenses, was $38 million. "Bribes?" Beverly asked, encouraging him to continue. "Agent Shaw, you can't run an operation this size without understanding that government is just another business expense. Judges need retirement funds. Prosecutors need campaign contributions. Federal agents need consulting fees. Even your precious FBI has been remarkably accommodating when properly motivated." Stone turned to face her directly. "Agent Rodriguez has been feeding us information about federal investigations for 3 years. The DEA task force leader takes a monthly retainer to ensure raids happen when our facilities are empty. 2 federal judges and a U.S. attorney have been partners in this operation since its inception." Beverly felt sick, but she kept the recording running. Stone was confessing to corruption that reached the highest levels of federal law enforcement. "But you," Stone continued, his voice turning cold, "you couldn't be bought. You couldn't be reasoned with. You couldn't even be scared off. Which brings us to our current situation." Stone nodded to his men, and Beverly heard the unmistakable sound of weapons being readied. "Agent Shaw, your investigation ends here, permanently." But even as Beverly faced the possibility of death, she clung to one hope: that her recording device was still transmitting to the FBI's emergency backup servers, and that somewhere, someone was listening. Beverly had spent 20 years preparing for moments like this. FBI combat training, survival courses, and tactical operations had taught her that survival often depended on patience, timing, and exploiting the overconfidence of criminals who underestimated federal agents. Stone made his first mistake by positioning her near a workstation with cutting tools. His second mistake was assuming that handcuffs eliminated all threat. As Stone continued his monologue, describing how Beverly's body would be dissolved in acid and her remains scattered across the desert, Beverly spotted her opportunity. Deputy Miller had placed his key ring on the workstation, just within reach if she could create the right distraction. "Sheriff," Beverly said loudly, "you're right about one thing. This operation is impressive, but you made one critical error." Stone paused, curious despite himself. "What's that, Agent Shaw?" "You assumed I was working alone." Beverly threw herself sideways, grabbing Miller's keys while simultaneously rolling behind a large processing tank. The movement caught Stone's men off guard, and their first shots went wide, striking metal surfaces and sending sparks flying through the warehouse. Beverly worked frantically to unlock her handcuffs while using the tank as cover. Her FBI training kicked in as she assessed escape routes, weapon locations, and tactical advantages. The warehouse's industrial layout worked in her favor. Pipes, machinery, and chemical storage tanks created a maze of cover that made it difficult for Stone's men to coordinate their attack. As gunfire echoed through the building, Beverly managed to reach a computer terminal. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing the facility's communication system and connecting to the internet. She activated every emergency protocol she knew: FBI distress beacons, automated location transmitters, and most importantly, a direct upload of her recorded evidence to multiple federal databases. Within seconds, her location, Stone's confession and evidence of the entire operation were being transmitted to FBI headquarters, the DEA, the U.S. Attorney's Office, and Jake Turner's news organization. Beverly's phone, still hidden in her pocket, began receiving confirmation signals. The cavalry was coming. But she still had to survive long enough for help to arrive. Using her knowledge of industrial facilities, Beverly made her way toward the warehouse's emergency systems. If she could trigger the fire suppression system, the chaos might provide enough cover for her to escape. Stone's voice echoed through the warehouse. "Agent Shaw, you're only delaying the inevitable. There's nowhere to run out here." Beverly smiled grimly as she reached the fire suppression controls. "Sheriff, you're about to learn what inevitable really means." She pulled the alarm. 50 miles away in Phoenix, Jake Turner was receiving the digital treasure trove that Beverly had transmitted from Stone's warehouse. His hands trembled as he downloaded the files: audio recordings, financial documents, photographs, and most incredibly, video footage from inside the drug processing facility. "Get me live airtime," Turner shouted to his producer. "Emergency broadcast. Break into regular programming. This is national news." While within minutes, Phoenix News was interrupting its afternoon programming with a special report. "Good afternoon, I'm Jake Turner with Phoenix News, and we're bringing you breaking coverage of what may be the largest police corruption scandal in Arizona history." Turner's voice was steady, professional, but his eyes blazed with the intensity of a journalist who knew he was breaking the story of his career. "We have obtained exclusive recordings of Sheriff Duncan Stone of Desert Springs, Arizona, confessing to operating a drug trafficking empire worth nearly $60 million annually. These recordings were made by FBI agent Beverly Shaw, who has been held illegally by Sheriff Stone's department for the past 4 days." Turner played excerpts from Beverly's recording, Stone's voice filling television screens and internet streams across the state. 30 years of building something magnificent. We move more product through this corridor than the next 5 operations combined. Our gross revenue last year was $57 million. As Stone's voice continued detailing his criminal empire, Turner provided context and background. Sheriff Stone describes a network of corruption that includes federal agents, judges, prosecutors, and politicians at multiple levels of government. The broadcast was simultaneously streaming online, and social media platforms were exploding with shares, comments, and outrage. #Desert Springs corruption began trending nationally within minutes. Turner's phone was ringing constantly as news organizations across the country requested permission to rebroadcast the story. But Turner kept his focus on the most critical element. Beverly Shaw was still in mortal danger. "Agent Shaw is currently being held at an undisclosed location in the desert near Desert Springs. FBI tactical teams are en route, but time is critical." The broadcast included a live map showing Beverly's last known location, based on the GPS coordinates her phone had transmitted before going silent. Turner looked directly into the camera. "Sheriff Duncan Stone, if you're watching this broadcast, understand that your operation has been exposed to the world. The evidence has been transmitted to federal authorities, news organizations, and social media platforms. There is no containing this story." He paused, his voice growing harder. "Release Agent Shaw immediately. Surrender to federal authorities. Your 30-year empire is over." But even as Turner spoke those words, he knew that Stone, cornered and desperate, was more dangerous than ever. The FBI's Phoenix Tactical Response Team reached Stone's warehouse compound just as the fire suppression system Beverly had triggered was filling the building with chemical foam. Black SUVs surrounded the facility while helicopters circled overhead, their searchlights cutting through the desert twilight. Special Agent Martinez, the team leader, coordinated the assault through his headset. "All teams in position. Primary objective is Agent Shaw's safe recovery. Secondary objective is preservation of evidence and arrest of suspects." Beverly heard the helicopters first, then the amplified voice echoing across the desert. "Federal agents, this facility is surrounded. Exit the building with your hands visible." Inside the warehouse, Stone's carefully controlled empire was collapsing into chaos. Workers dropped their weapons and ran for exits, only to find federal agents waiting. Stone himself stood frozen in the center of his operation, watching 30 years of work crumble in minutes. "Sheriff Stone," Beverly called out through the chemical foam, "you said I didn't understand the scope of what I was dealing with. You were right. I underestimated how thoroughly you'd be destroyed when the truth came out." Stone raised his weapon toward Beverly's voice, but federal snipers had already acquired their targets. Red laser dots danced across his chest as tactical teams moved into the warehouse. "Duncan Stone, you are under arrest for drug trafficking, money laundering, corruption of federal officials, and kidnapping of a federal agent." As handcuffs clicked around Stone's wrists, Beverly emerged from behind the processing equipment, her FBI credentials held high. "Agent Shaw," Martinez said with obvious relief, "are you injured?" "I'm fine, but we need to move fast." Stone mentioned federal judges and prosecutors on his payroll. If we don't arrest them simultaneously, evidence will disappear and witnesses will be intimidated. Martinez nodded. "Already in motion. Coordinated arrests are happening in Phoenix, Tucson, and Washington, D.C. The Attorney General authorized emergency warrants based on your transmitted evidence." J.A. As Stone was led away in federal custody, Beverly looked around the warehouse that had nearly become her tomb. Boxes of drugs, millions in cash, and detailed records of the most extensive corruption network in Arizona history. Justice, Beverly thought, was about to be served on a massive scale. The arrests continued throughout the night as federal teams executed warrants across 3 states. Jake Turner's newsroom had become a war room, with reporters tracking developments in real time and broadcasting updates to a nation transfixed by the unfolding scandal. This is Jake Turner with continuing coverage of what we're now calling the Desert Springs Conspiracy. In the past 6 hours, federal agents have arrested 15 law enforcement officers, 3 federal judges, 2 U.S. prosecutors, 8 business executives, and 12 state and local politicians. The scope of Stone's network was staggering. Financial records seized from the warehouse revealed corruption payments totaling millions of dollars over 3 decades. Bank accounts from Switzerland to the Cayman Islands were being frozen as investigators traced the money trail. Judge Wilson, who had initiated the legal proceedings that gave federal agents jurisdiction to act, spoke to reporters from his Desert Springs home. "This investigation proves that corruption cannot survive transparency. When citizens demand accountability and law enforcement officers risk their lives for justice, no criminal enterprise is too powerful to fall." Martha Williams, safely relocated to federal protection, watched the arrests from a Phoenix hotel room. 30 years I've been waiting for this day," she told Turner in a phone interview. 30 years of watching good people leave town because they couldn't fight the system. Tonight, the system is fighting back. The national implications were enormous. The Attorney General announced the formation of a special task force to investigate corruption in rural law enforcement nationwide. Congressional committees scheduled emergency hearings. The Justice Department launched reviews of pending cases in jurisdictions where Stone's network had influence. Beverly, undergoing debriefing at the FBI Phoenix field office, watched the coverage with mixed emotions. Justice was being served, but the scope of corruption was worse than she'd imagined. "Agent Shaw," Special Agent Martinez said, reviewing her preliminary report, "your actions have exposed the largest law enforcement corruption network in modern U.S. history. The reverberations from this case will be felt for years." Beverly nodded, exhausted but satisfied. "Good. Maybe the next federal agent who stumbles into a corrupt system will find it a little easier to get help." The Desert Springs conspiracy was over, but the work of rebuilding trust in law enforcement was just beginning. 2 weeks after the arrests, Desert Springs held its first town hall meeting in over a decade. The community center was packed with residents who had lived in fear and silence for too long, now ready to reclaim their town. Martha Williams stood at the podium, her voice steady and strong. She had been selected to chair the interim municipal council that would oversee Desert Springs until new elections could be held. "Neighbors, friends, fellow citizens," Martha began, "we gather tonight not to celebrate the destruction of our community, but to begin its rebirth." Beverly sat in the back of the room, having returned to witness the community healing she had helped make possible. She watched faces she recognized from her brief time in town. The store owner who had participated in her setup now sat with his head bowed in shame, but other residents looked forward with hope and determination. "For 30 years, many of us knew something was wrong but felt powerless to speak up," Martha continued. "We were told that questioning authority was dangerous. We were taught that corruption was simply the price of doing business. Tonight, we reject those lies." The crowd erupted in sustained applause. "We will rebuild our police department with officers who serve the community, not themselves. We will elect leaders who answer to voters, not criminals. We will create a town where our children can grow up without fear." Dr. Sarah Peterson, the town's only physician, stood to address the crowd. "Martha Williams has my full support for mayor. She had the courage to speak truth when it mattered most." The nomination was seconded by Tom Martinez, whose family had run the gas station on Main Street for 3 generations. Soon the entire crowd was on its feet, chanting Martha's name. Beverly smiled, watching democracy reborn in real time. This was why she had become an FBI agent. Not for the headlines or commendations, but for moments like this when justice created the space for healing and hope. The community that Stone had terrorized for 3 decades was finally free. 3 months later, Beverly Shaw stood in the FBI Phoenix Field office, receiving the Bureau's highest commendation for courage under fire. The ceremony was attended by FBI Director Williams, who had flown in personally to recognize her service. "Agent Shaw," Director Williams said, pinning the decoration to her uniform, "your actions in Desert Springs exemplify the highest traditions of federal law enforcement. You risked everything to uphold the oath you swore to defend justice and protect the innocent." Beverly accepted the honor